only fitting to go and talk about Adam and Eve. So that is where our story is going to start. If you remember last week, we talked about the whole week that God took to create the earth and how on the last day he rested, and that was the holy day, which is what we often think of as Sunday, just a day of rest and relaxation and just peace. So we're going to look into Adam and Eve. And so if you remember, Adam had already been created, right? He was created from dust. And so Adam was wandering the garden and was looking at all of the plants and animals that God had given him, and the rivers flowing from Eden. And he loved everything that he saw, but he was kind of lonely. And so he called out to God and said, God, please bring me a companion, somebody that I can live life with. And God said, okay, here's what we'll do. We'll send all of the animals to you to name and see if we can find you a companion that way. So God sent animals like snakes and fish and elephants and mice and the little tiny bugs and the really big blue whales, right? And Adam was naming all of these animals, but there wasn't a suitable helper for him. And so God decided to put Adam to sleep. And when this happened, he took one of his ribs. So if you don't know where your ribs are, they're right up here. They're the muscles that protect your lungs and your heart and all of your important organs in your chest. And so he took out one of the rib bones and closed up the flesh and created a woman out of. And Adam woke up and said, this is now the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. And so it goes on to say that this is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, for they have become one flesh. And they actually were naked and they didn't feel any shame. So they weren't embarrassed about going to school naked because everybody else was naked too, right? So then shortly after that, we have the story of the fall, which is actually a super important story. A lot of you guys already know a little bit about it, but that's our story. If you remember back to last week, we had all of these trees and plants and fruits and veggies that we could eat except one. We had to keep away from one tree with fruit, and it was the tree of knowledge, right? And so Eve is wandering around the garden, enjoying all the sights, looking at all of the pretty flowers, and she comes across the tree of knowledge, right? And so when this happens, a serpent actually comes up to her and says, but did God really say you can't eat from anything in the garden? And Eve responds with, well, actually, we can eat from everything except this tree right here, the tree of knowledge. And so the serpent asks her again, but did God say you must not eat fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden or you'll die? And Eve said, yeah, we aren't allowed to touch it. We can't touch it. We can't go near it. And the serpent says, surely you won't die. He says, for God knows what's to happen if you eat from this tree. He said, you will become like God. You'll have the knowledge of good and evil. And this sounded really appealing to Eve. And so Eve took a bite. And she went to her husband and said, here, you take a bite too, because it's really good. And so they did. And after this, they all got embarrassed because they didn't have any clothes on. So they tried to hide and cover up themselves and make clothes out of leaves. And so, hold on, gotta swallow. And so after this, Adam and Eve both hear God entering the garden, right? And they get so scared because they know that they messed up. So they tried to hide from him. And they hid under a bush trying to avoid. And God calls out to them and says, "Where are you?" And and he goes and says, "I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." That's what Adam says. And after that, God asks the question, "Who told you that you were naked? Like, who told you that you didn't have any clothes on?" And and then he asks, "Did you eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge that I commanded you not to eat from?" And um, Adam actually says, "The woman that you put here did this actually, and she told me to eat it. So it's really her fault, but actually it's your fault because you gave her to me and she gave it to me. So really, this is all your fault, God." And that wasn't super pleasing to God. So um, after this, Eve chimes in and she says, "Well, the serpent actually tricked me and told me that I should eat it." And so after this, a lot of things happen. So the first thing that happens is God curses the snake. He says, "You'll crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life." Um, and then it says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman because of between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head with his heel." So basically, he's saying, people aren't going to like you anymore, and you're not going to be looked at as something that's great and fun. And you can like snakes. There's nothing wrong with liking snakes, but most people don't enjoy spending time with snakes. So that's kind of where that comes from. And so then he turns to Eve and says, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe with painful labor, and you will get when you give birth to children." So basically he's saying it's going to hurt a lot when you have a baby. And for any of the parents listening, I am sure that you can attest to that. It is not the most pleasant experience in the world, but 100% worth it nonetheless. And so then he follows on to say, "You will your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you." So basically, he's just saying that you and your husband will kind of work together, and he'll be the head of the house, but it'll be kind of a partnership. And then he turns to Adam and says, "Because you listened to your wife and ate the fruit from the tree, which I told you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it, and all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles, and you will eat plants from the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since that is from where you were taken, or from the since that is from where you are taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." All right, so basically, and that little blurb, he's just saying you're going to have to work hard for your food. You're going to have to farm for it. You're going to have to cook it. It's not just going to be here for you anymore. You're going to have to wait for it to grow and produce fruit. Um, and so after that, God kicks them out of the garden, and he makes them clothes so that they don't feel embarrassed, and takes them out of the garden. Um, and that is where our story today ends, which is a very, very fun story, but not fun, but important story. And next, I believe it is